there, welcome to my channel. My name's Colleen and I'm so glad you're joining me today. I like to play around with things and just have that kind of mentality that says, what if I do this and what if I do that? So today I'm going to do a what if with you. It's experimental and I did do some ahead of time and I will tell you what my results are. So I do quite a lot of fabric painting and I like to use a resist. That is something that blocks out areas of the fabric so I can paint straight over them. And I've played around with all sorts of things from using flour and water and cornstarch, many other things like masking tape. But I thought, what if we use a glue stick and a stencil? Would that actually work? So in order to use this, you need to keep your stencil flat on the table. So you could tape this down if you wanted to. And with the glue stick, you're going to be applying it from the stencil onto the fabric, not from the fabric this way, because you don't want to push any glue underneath. It is a little bit tricky because you can't actually see this as clearly as some of the other resists, but I am going to try and make sure wherever possible that I've actually got it really well covered over the outline area, because otherwise I'm going to lose my shape altogether. Hard to see whether you've gone over an area, so this is unlike some of the other resists where you can actually see when the fabric gets wet. This one is not as easily. And then the fabric does have a tendency to want to lift as you're rubbing this glue stick over it. So I think I wouldn't go much larger than this bird stencil for fear of not being able to cover it at all. Excuse me. I'm going to lift this off now and set that aside, and I'm going to use a cardboard stencil here, which is just a cutout from some packaging. This is just a map of Africa. If you do use cardboard stencils, you can always coat them with a layer of podge or some deco varnish, water-based varnish. Even a spray would do if you want to use them over and over again. And you'll find that there are many kinds of these templates that you can actually use repeatedly. Excuse me, got a tickle. You would need to clean these afterwards. With a cardboard one, I'd wipe it with paper towel, and with the plastic one, I'll wash it with water. Oh, excuse me. Right, so I have prepared some ahead of time. The only indication that I've got that there is something here is that I can feel that it is slightly rough under the skin. And you need to make sure that when you come to paint, that you've got the rough side facing upwards towards you and not facing downwards. Otherwise, that would be a complete disaster. I've got myself a fairly nice wide brush, and I'm going to take some fabric paint, and I'm just going to simply brush now over the whole design. You should start to see a little bit of where the design is by the outline showing through. You'll see it is slightly lighter underneath, and that's a good indication because that actually means then that I have blocked out those areas fairly successfully. I must admit that the first attempts that I had doing this were not great. So in order for you to actually get familiar with this, I think that it would be a wise idea just to start on something very small, just as a test run. And don't be tempted to start on a piece of paper and then move to fabric. They behave differently, and you will find that the application of putting the paint on is going to be a little bit more tricky on the fabric than it will be on the paper, because it does have a tendency to want to move and to stretch a little bit as it gets wet. That's just normal for fabric. Once your fabric has dried completely, you'd need to iron on the back with a hot dry iron. That is to simply set your fabric paints into the fabric. It's a bit like ironing over a stain on your garment, maybe fruit stain. Then that will set the color into the fabric. And then you're just simply going to rinse this under a cool tap. You don't need detergent or anything, just rinse it to get rid of the glue resist. Now, the one word of caution while you're doing this technique is not to brush over this resist area too much, because it will lift with water and there is a little bit of moisture in your fabric paints. So if you brush over that too much, you're going to find that you start to lift up the design. All these sort of thicker bits of paint that are over the resist area, those will just lift off when I come to rinse it. So I've now done this one area that's actually got the bird, and let me turn it around the right way, and you can see that there is a definite outline there. You can see where the lines are. So I think I'm going to be reasonably successful with that. And now I'm going to just simply do the second one, which is the design of Africa. And hopefully that will work just as well. when I've done this one, I'm just going to show you some of the other designs I did and talk through some of the things that happened while I was doing it, because this was a learning curve for me. I'd never done this before, and I think I'd like to pass on those tips to you so that you can benefit from my playing around here. Right, so I'm just smoothing out the paint, making sure it goes to the edge. I think I might use this little panel and stick it on my rucksack since I live in Africa. I like to go hiking, and it's quite nice to have a few things on your back. It always starts a conversation if you've got something on your backpack. We have a lot of tourists here where we don't have COVID, and if you're on the mountains and they're walking, then they stop to chat to you. So it's rather a fun way of starting a conversation. Right, so I can already see here that my map of Africa isn't maybe as sharp as I'd like it, but I will show you that once it's completely dry. So here are some of the things that happened to me while I was playing around. I did find that the cardboard stencil, being slightly thicker than the plastic one, was a little bit more difficult to get a smooth edge. And you can see around the edges here where the glue hasn't actually touched the surface of the actual stencil of the fabric. It does tend to sort of want to collect a little bit around this edge, and then it's difficult to get it onto the fabric. So I think in the future I would stick to working with a thin stencil, like a plastic stencil of some sort or a Milo one. This is the bird that I did the first time round, and you can quite easily see here where the edges of my glue resist aren't sharp. I'm not totally unhappy with this. I think I might do a little bit of embroidery on it, or I might do something in a collage kind of effect with it, so I can set that aside. But I did have a smaller bird stencil, and I was not also very careful with the design here and got some of the resist a little bit weak, but I quite like the way that the paint is integrated in with the design. It looks as though it's in shadow or the feathers are slightly darker. And I did try a little bit of this technique with some wording, and this wasn't as successful because, as you can see, it's very difficult to get the crisp edges of the wording because of the letters being quite complicated in the little ins and outs that they've actually got. Maybe if it was a single letter, it might be a better fit. So there was my wording and my two smaller birds and my bigger birds and the wet ones, which I will show you as soon as they dry. Please have fun, and I'd love to hear your comments and thoughts about this. Bye for now.